Yeah. Um, so, good morning. Senator Stack is in caucus presently, but he will be providing a statement. So one, I just want to say thank you very much for being here. Obviously, geriatric release is something critically important. And as we say on page 6 of the report, you'll see that 13 states have a mechanism to release elderly inmates. And what's so critically important is that the most common elements of the geriatric release statute are as follows. Typically, inmates must be 60 years of age and have served 10 years of their sentence to be eligible for geriatric release. 20. Most states do not permit geriatric release of inmates convicted of serious violent crimes or sex crimes, and why it makes sense for New Jersey. Well, what's of importance is the cost of caring for an elderly inmate is at least double that of an average inmate. And reducing the elderly inmate population has the potential to save New Jersey taxpayers literally millions of dollars. And if you can refer to page 10, under geriatric release makes sense, you'll see the immense cost savings. And that is under the first paragraph. New Jersey's total prison population was 19,006, 868 inmates over the age of 60. As of 2023, the over 60 inmate population has grown to 989. And what's also important is that upon release, individuals would be eligible for Medicaid, federal support for health care, which is also so essential for the taxpayers. Also understood is that public safety is not largely impacted. A study using data released from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, National Corrections Reporting Program on prisoners released from federal and state prisons between 1991 to 2016 showed 3% of individuals and only 1% of individuals convicted of violent crimes were reincarcerated for new crimes within 3 years. The other point that's important, the third point, is that most elderly inmates do not qualify for compassionate release. And that's significant. The burden on petitioners who seek compassionate release is exceptionally high. It requires a showing by clear and convincing evidence that the petitioner suffers from a terminal condition or syndrome. And number 4, that the elderly inmates can die with dignity, that they have the capacity through geriatric release to die with dignity, and underscoring the importance of the eligibility factors set forth in this proposal, as well as the petition process, which we believe is rigorous and would be reviewed by the court. We believe that this legislation is sensible, is cost-effective, and compassionate. And at this time, I'd like to call upon the illustrious, the wizened Larry Lusberg. That was an applause line.
Yeah, no, we don't need it. Thanks, Jim. So I wanted to just highlight a few of the points that Governor McGreevey made. It's sort of disgraceful, to be honest with you, that New Jersey, which heralds itself as one of the most progressive states when it comes to criminal justice reform, does not have a geriatric release program, whereas so many of our fellow states do. It's really a matter not just of some sort of radical criminal justice reform project, but of pure humanity. People who are sick and old should not have to die in jail. And the bill that has been introduced, which I should note, and this is very important, has now been endorsed in essence with very few changes by the Criminal Sentencing and Disposition Commission, which is chaired by former Attorney General Chris Perino, would do the following. It would provide that for people who are 60 years and over and have served 20 years or more of their sentence, that they could petition for release. That number changes for people who have been convicted of murder, where they have to be 62 years of age or older and would have to have served 30 years. 30 years being, for murder cases, the minimum for eligibility for parole. But it's not automatic. A court may consider a number of factors to assure that the public safety will be protected. And there's process that's provided for prosecutors who are involved in the case. Let me say it again. There's process that's provided for prosecutors who are involved in the case, for victims of crime, and really for the criminal justice system as a general matter to fully evaluate any given inmate to make sure that at the end of the day, what happens is just and humane, but also will not compromise the safety of the community. I would commend all of you to read the Geriatric Release Report. I think it's a compelling document. I think there's now, both among the scholars and public policy experts from both sides of the political spectrum, a consensus that this is the kind of thing that ought to characterize a civilized system of criminal justice. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the bill. It's an excellent bill, and we fully endorse it.
And I just want to emphasize, I'm sorry, bless you, Kev. To go to Mr. Lusberg's point is that most elderly inmates simply do not qualify for compassionate release. And I think that's a critical point. I think New Jersey historically has passed compassionate release, which requires a demonstration by clear and convincing evidence that the petitioner suffers from a terminal condition, disease, or syndrome, and is physically incapable of committing any crime. Overwhelmingly, the elderly would not meet that burden unless in the throes of a terminal disease with literally months to live. So the purpose of geriatric release is, as Larry said, is to understand that for these individuals who have served the punitive aspect of their sentence, or literally in the last years of their life, that this is a compassionate course, both by the de minimis risk by virtue of their age, but also the appreciable cost savings, which would inure to the benefit of the state, particularly in terms of healthcare and Medicaid, which is appreciable. So I just wanted to emphasize the distinction between compassionate release and geriatric release. Compassionate release, in effect, requires someone to be approaching death as demonstrated by a physician. Geriatric release enables that elderly individual through a court process, which is significantly rigorous, to allow, from a complete review of the file, victim input statements, et cetera, for an individual to apply for the geriatric release. So I just think that's an important distinction I wanted to underscore. Does anybody have any questions? Calvin? Yeah, Calvin will say at the end.
Could you talk about the situation as it exists with inmates who are ill, who are elderly? What is happening with them when you're talking about cost burdens that are double, triple, whatever? I think I read that it was like $74,000 on average for the average.
Sure. There's really a couple of questions that are embedded in that. Let me unpack it just a bit. First of all, with regard to people who are really ill, those people are able to get compassionate release, as Governor McGreevey said, if they are in fact about to die. And I will say that very, very few people have been released from New Jersey state prisons on that basis. I've been involved in a number of cases, including cases before our state Supreme Court, where judges have declined to release people who then did die in prison, and who really in any sort of civilized system would be released so that they could die at home and with dignity. This bill is different. Those cases are always going to be relatively few. They should be decided differently than they're being decided, and we're challenging those kinds of things in the courts. But this is a broader bill. This goes to your point about cost, to the fundamental cost of imprisoning old people. Our prisons the prisons in New Jersey have now approximately 1,000 old people, and those people are automatically more expensive to house. They are harder to get around. They are beset by illness much more often. We all know that as we get older, whether it's diabetes, I'm a diabetic, so I know, or other ailments that cost the state money to take care of. There are people who disproportionately take up the state's resources in terms of medical treatment, whether inside or outside of prison. The savings to not have to house those people truly is in the millions of dollars. And having been around criminal justice reform for a long time, I know that saving money is an important part of what it's about. And it's one of the reasons why the death penalty was abolished. It was very expensive. Now, that doesn't mean that we want to do anything to compromise the safety of the community. People should not be released if they will be a danger to the community. But there's two aspects of that. First, as the report makes clear in really compelling statistics, old people just don't recidivate. You won't be surprised to know that people who are released at the age of 60 and older almost never go back to prison. And so it's a distinct population. But even beyond that, this bill provides for a process to test that. And it's a rigorous process, not only because, as Governor McGreevey said, a court reviews it and looks at all of the facts, including a person's prison record, including the underlying facts of their offenses, including the rehabilitation that they may or may not have achieved. But victims may be heard, and importantly for this bill, the defendants themselves, the inmates themselves, are represented by the public defender's office so that a full and complete record can be made so that they can have the advocacy they deserve, because they'll be faced with the advocacy of the state if it chooses to oppose these. Potentially, there's just such extraordinary advantages to this, to your question, in terms of cost savings, number one, but I wouldn't underestimate humanity, number two. In other countries around the world, in many of our sister states, old people are just not held for the periods of time that we do here in New Jersey currently.
If I can, to pick up what Larry said. So the CMS, which is the parent agency of Medicaid, challenged when the state of Connecticut attempted to provide health care outside of the prison while an individual was still under the domain or under the jurisdiction of the Connecticut Department of Corrections. CMS and Medicaid have moved toward a more enlightened position, particularly in a California waiver. Commissioner Edelman applied for a waiver, which CMS reviewed, but unfortunately was denied. So what's important to understand that if an individual remains under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections, even if no longer housed in a Department of Corrections facility, but an adjacent facility or a medical facility, but that person still remains under the auspices of NJDOC, CMS and Medicaid will typically challenge the permissibility of the state to bill Medicaid as that individual is still under the auspices of DOC. So to echo what Larry said, is that if an individual is now pursuant to geriatric release and eligible for Medicaid, the entirety of that cost will be borne by the federal government as opposed to the taxpayers of the state of New Jersey. But the other point that I wanted to mention, if I can just go to page 8 for a second in the report. Sorry to be so pedestrian. But what's the core principles, if you can, is to see that a certificate of eligibility is issued by the Department of Corrections. And that's when the individuals attain the age of 80, serve 20 years in custody, the age of 60, 20 years in custody, and you'll see the exception for certificate of eligibility when the person is 62, 30 years in custody for a conviction of murder. But what's interesting is the petition process. Basically, the inmate files a petition with the Superior Court. There's representation you see in the second bullet, the Office of Public Defender. There's a hearing, and then there's the release factors. And if I can, the release factors are important because they were enshrined in the legislation. It's the inmate's age at the time of the offense, the time of the petition, the history and characteristics, statement of victim or victim's family members, the report, and the potential benefits. And you'll see on the second page, on the top of page 9, potential cost savings to the state and a reentry plan for the inmate. And then you'll see that the court shall release an inmate unless the court overcomes the presumption by saying the inmate is endangered to the safety of the person or not ready for reentry. And then you'll see, if granted, they'll modify the inmate's sentence such that there'll be a 5-year term of supervised release. Presumptive term of parole supervision is 5 years. So I think what's important to note is that there's a potential for substantial savings by the state of New Jersey, as Larry alluded to, in terms of the significant number of individuals, elderly individuals in our correctional system. But in addition to that, that this is a robust and rigorous review of the petitioner's background and of the suitability of the petitioner to be released. And with that, I'd like to introduce the great Calvin Bass. Cal, come on up here, Cal. Cal's been a friend of mine for a number of years. How many years did you serve?
I served 38 years and 6 months.
38 years and 6 months. Calvin was incarcerated at the age of
14.
And for driving.
Yes, sir.
So
Accomplished, yes, sir. First of all, I'm so honored to be here at this press conference with our former governor, James E. McGreevey, and what he's proposing. I mean, I had opportunity when I was in Trenton State Prison, briefly. I was transferred. I went from Rawway to Trenton 2010. I was transferred to Southwood State Prison. And Southwood State Prison have a medical department that they call ECU. Well, the elderly is housed there. And as Larry was speaking about it, and I was listening to him, and I was reflecting back, I was a part of a program that we had designed called palliative care. And where we sit with the elderly, even upon their death, because it says no one should die alone. And when and it was shocking to me, because these are some inmates that watched me come into the system. They're in their 70s, and they called me. They called me because my street name was Sal. They say, Sal, and I'm looking, I'm like puzzled. They say, you don't remember me? Come closer. And they tell me what it is, and I just feel sad. And they say, I'm dying, and if you could come and talk to me. So I come and talk to them every day, read the Bible to them. If it's a Muslim, I read the Quran or Torah, whatever they wanted to do, but just to make them feel comfortable as possible. And to present the bill, the geriatric bill, it makes me feel so good. And I wrote a lot of guys in Southwood. I said, listen, when you go to ECU, let the guys know that, Governor McGreevey, is proposing a geriatric bill. Hopefully these individuals, can benefit from it. But some of the individuals that I sat with until they actually physically expire, and you got to sit with them. Sometimes I sit with them, maybe we had different shifts. I may sit with them for 8 hours, then I relieve, you'll come and relieve me for 8 hours until they actually, pass on. And to see what we're doing now, and even to see my position that I'm in right now, to be out here now at the age of 55 years old, and to be a part of something that's so phenomenal as this right here, and also to have somebody that cares about those that's been forgotten of. No, we can't change the fact that a crime was committed. The aggravating factor will always remain. A crime was committed, okay? But when you look at these individuals that their health is deteriorating and they're not going to harm, and trust me when I tell you, the ones I have known and met and been around for years, over 30-some years, they're not going to reoffend. But this bill would mean so much even for those who have had the opportunity to sit with and watch them expire and pass on. But they would feel good to know that now it's coming around where the guys that's behind them won't die in prison, and most of all, won't die alone. So that's one thing I feel very good about the geriatric bill. As Larry had alluded to, is the difference, because you have some individuals that I witnessed that was paralegals, that was terminally ill, and applied for medical compassionate release and medical release, and they was denied. It was denied. So I'm saying that not something that I heard, but something I witnessed and I've been a part of and been in their lives when I was at Southwood State Prison working in ECU, being a part of palliative care.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm really grateful to Calvin for all of his support in working with our reentry participants. But I think what Calvin alluded to, Cal, was the challenges of palliative or compassionate release and why this bill is different. I just wanted to underscore that. If there's any questions on the difference between compassionate release and geriatric, you get it. Any questions?
Yeah, not on that last bit, but I am wondering, so looking through here, I didn't see in the release factors for consideration, any sort of, there is a reentry plan. Could you
Yes.
talk about the reentry requirements you sort of imagine for this bill?
Sure. I mean, thanks, Nick. The reentry requirements would set forth the traditional penumbra of reentry considerations, including residence, typically considering the individual's age. We would not be focusing in on employment, but we're looking at age, suitability or applicability for federal and state and local programming. In addition, health requirements, so that for those individuals who may be suffering from, for example, cancer or heart disease, the availability of connecting those individuals to diagnostic testing and ongoing medical treatment. So again, as Calvin alluded to, many individuals who have applied for compassionate release were denied because, candidly, a physician would ascribe that they were within 6 months of death with the certitude required by the compassionate release bill. But so it would be working with a healthcare navigator to determine access to healthcare. So it's the proximity to typically a federally qualified health center, as opposed to a tertiary care setting, which would provide for the Medicaid treatment and the Medicaid eligibility, as well as residential housing, and then also family and house of worship support. So is there a family in close proximity? Is there a house of worship in close proximity?
If I could just add one thing. So housing is critical. And I've put together these reentry plans for people, and having one of the things that
And he has
assures.
a great assistant.
Yes, yeah. And not so great. It is persuasive to a court and to others who are assessing whether someone is going to be a danger, that they actually have a place to go, that they're not going to be on the streets homeless. And so housing is a critical element of the reentry plan. And not to blow the horn of NJRC, but having an organization like the New Jersey Reentry Corporation that will assist people with the whole range of supports that they need. You know, Governor McGreevey mentioned family, but there also are social organizations like NJRC that will help by making sure that people are looked after, to help them actually navigate the healthcare system, to make sure they can get healthcare, to provide all the requisite psychological and physical supports that somebody needs, and to make sure that there are people who are standing by somebody, because we all know that that is critical to the question of public safety and to whether someone will recidivate. So, and NJRC's statistics in that regard are overwhelming. People who are affiliated with NJRC just don't go back to jail in anything like the numbers of anybody else, and that's all even more so with regard to old people.
And so, Nick, just to follow up on this question, so we work closely with RWJ Barnabas on providing healthcare navigation, particularly for women being released from Edna Mahan, women grappling with oncology, cardiology challenges, as well as we work closely also with Hackensack Meridian for our veterans that are that are suffering from trauma, addiction, et cetera. So we actively do this, but to go to Larry's point, this is critically important. And we've been petitioned by many families who want to take their elderly loved one into their home for their last years of their life. So housing would be critically important. Thank you.
You said that Chris Carino and the commission has pretty much signed off on this because it's very, very similar to the recommendations that were in their report. So is you've got the okay from them, is Senator Stack officially sponsoring this bill? And there is a lot of similarity also with Senator McCurdy's bill, which didn't go anywhere. So what are your expectations for this bill? And how is it going to be different?
It was the goal or the objective of this bill to listen and incorporate the recommendations of both the commission, legislators, and the broader community, which my sense is the bill's process is cleaner, is tighter, and has greater accountability. So it would be our intention to have strong bipartisan support in the state Senate and in the General Assembly, so that it's our goal, based on sort of the common sense merits, to incorporate Senator Stack, Senator McCurdy, and Republican members of the Senate in support of this bill. I think as Mr. Lusberg, as Larry said, this is common sense legislation that will save state taxpayers the requisite cost of what would be Medicaid reimbursement without sacrificing public safety, and provide, as Larry said, a compassionate course of action for these individuals. So and we've had bipartisan interest.
If I could just say, I think this is a unique point in history when this bill is more likely to pass than ever before. We're at a time of fiscal difficulties, and so the imperative to save money will be a compelling one. But leaving that aside, the sense that too many old people are being housed in our jails and prisons is one that's really sweeping the country. And so the response we're getting, not only from the legislature, and Governor McGreevey is right, we listened after the last bill and made changes to make this a more rigorous, tighter system. But beyond that, we have the support of the Criminal Sentencing and Disposition Commission on something very close. In fact, if anything, one that would make release even more likely, is something that we think makes this the unique time in history where this bill can pass, even if it didn't last time.
Yeah, and I being in state prisons and in Cal, visiting individuals who are in their early 80s and at the point in their lives when they're approaching death. And one mutual friend of Calvin said, because I can't walk down the stairs, let alone run. But I mean, the point is these are individuals that are in large measure approaching death, and without geriatric release, they will die in state prison, costing state taxpayers exorbitant amounts of money. And so we think this is compassionate, it's decent, it's fiscally responsible, but also the safeguards in what the court can consider has been significantly expanded. And I would to go to your question, I think this legislation provides the court with the array of factors which are critically important to determine the appropriateness of geriatric release.
On recidivism, so looking back to the 3-year recidivism report from the 2015 releases, I know they noted the recidivism rate, the reincarceration rate for individuals aged 60 and up was about 11-12%. That's quite a bit higher than the numbers cited in the.
Yeah, I saw that. Nick, can I get back to you on that? I saw that discrepancy because,
Yeah, we don't think those numbers are
Yeah.
right for a number. There were federal numbers, and we just don't think that those numbers are right. The numbers you have are based on, I think, solid, peer-reviewed social science, and we're really comfortable that those are the correct numbers. Just from a common sense perspective, there's no way that people who are that 1 out of 8 people who are released at the age of 60 are committing crimes. It's just, it doesn't sound right, and it isn't right. And so the data that we put in this report, and I know I worked on that as others in this room did, seem to stand the test of time and of social
and was
science.
corroborated
Yeah.
on a broader template.
So it's somewhere between 1% and 3%, depending on the age, it looks like.
Good question. We actually grappled with that ourselves
Oh, for sure.
and looked into those numbers.
But we can get you more details.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Good. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Yeah, have to clock this. Yeah,